The city's swimming champion is my wife. She instinctively saved her first love when we both fell into the water. I struggled in the water, and my wife Zoe gave me a scornful look after she pulled him ashore. He then gave me a provocative look and said, "Sorry. Zoe is too tired to save you. You'll have to figure out how to get out on your own. You must have pushed Anthony, otherwise how could he have fallen into the water?" I lost my strength and began to sink downward, but Zoe became alarmed. Chapter 1. Help, help. My wife didn't even look at me when Anthony and I loudly called for assistance. As though she hadn't noticed me at all, she leaped into the water and swam directly toward Anthony. I wanted to call for help as I watched Zoe's back, but the river water immediately filled my mouth and nose. "Anthony, are you okay?" I was drowned by the icy river water, and I watched helplessly as Zoe rescued Anthony and carried him to safety. "Sorry, Zoe is too tired to save you. You'll have to figure out how to get out on your own." Anthony gave me a challenging look, and I wanted to say something, but all I could do was stare in despair. I sank slowly, until I was spotted by a swimmer and taken to shore. I coughed up water like a fish that was dying. Without even glancing at me, Zoe was occupied with using a towel to dry Anthony's head. It was only after she had finished that she looked at me in disdain. "You must have pushed Anthony, otherwise how could he have fallen into the water?" "Don't you know Anthony is afraid of water? Why would you do such a disgusting thing?" Anthony intervened. "It's okay, Zoe, don't be angry. I think William didn't do it on purpose. It's just that I was too close to you and he felt uncomfortable. It's always like this, just a few words to seal my fate. No matter what happens, Zoe always unconditionally believes Anthony's slander and provocation against me, just because he is her unforgettable first love from high school. William, you're disgusting. You should have drowned right now. You want to kill someone because you're uncomfortable, and the consequences would have been unimaginable if I hadn't been here today. All my energy had been expended struggling underwater. I was unable to even speak to argue with her. As though they were witnessing a hilarious joke, the onlookers pointed at us. As usual, I ought to have stood up for myself as soon as Anthony defamed me. I would bow my head, take responsibility for my actions, and apologize to both of them if Zoe didn't believe me. But I just figured it out in the middle of a desperate struggle. Life and death are the only things that matter. I struggled to sit up and stared at them, thinking, you two really are a perfect match. One dares to say it and the other dares to believe it. You still doubt our relationship at this point. I've already told you we're just friends. Can't you stop making trouble? Zoe said, turning her face black instantly. Think about it yourself. Zoe then took Anthony and turned back to the hotel, leaving me by the river. I've heard this phrase a lot in my 3 years of marriage. She would leave me with these words whenever I didn't comply with her requests or couldn't stand her and Anthony. And I would constantly approach her to apologize, acting as though I had done something wrong. Now that I look back on it, I see that I was the one who was not thinking clearly. A wife who is capable of disregarding my life is not someone I should value. Chapter 2. I had a high fever the following day and spent the whole day in the hotel because I'd been soaked in the chilly river water for too long. However, my fever was too high, and since I didn't know this city and was alone with Zoe and Anthony, nobody was available to look after me. I struggled to call Zoe after giving it some thought. I could hear loud DJ music blasting through my ears as soon as the call connected. When Zoe saw my call, her irritated voice said, "William, why are you calling? Don't you know we have our own things to do?" I controlled my temper and said politely, "Zoe, I'm sick." It was clear that Zoe and Anthony were at a club. "Would you kindly buy me some fever medicine and bring it to me?" The call was abruptly cut off before I could finish. I called again because I couldn't believe Zoe had purposefully hung up on me. Even more impatient this time, she said, "William, please stop bothering me. Do you think that pretending to be ill will fool me? Isn't it just because you don't want me to enjoy myself with Anthony? Don't cause any trouble. We're just unwinding after coming here for work." My fevered mind became even more confused as a deluge of words poured in. I took a moment to comprehend her meaning. Zoe believed I was feigning illness. With my consciousness becoming even more hazy, I fell back onto the bed. At that moment, the phone rang once more. I continued to hope that Zoe was changing her mind. However, it was a friend from college. "William, I noticed your social media." I didn't recognize Jessica's voice for a second, but she said, "You're in the city too, right? Want to grab dinner?" She was my best friend in college, but we gradually lost contact after I graduated. I called back in a raspy voice, "Jessica, could you get me some fever medicine? I'll give you the address." Jessica reached my room in less than 30 minutes. I rolled out of bed and opened the door. "I thought your wife was here too," Jessica said as she entered. "We came to this city for a project Zoe was working on, so I grinned bitterly and said, 'Why isn't she taking care of you? She's out partying.' She does that for a living, and I didn't mind, but Anthony insisted on coming because he wanted to see the sights. I accompanied him because I couldn't let him come by himself with my wife. But throughout the trip, Zoe hadn't been nice to me. She continued to boss me around in addition to not sharing a room. Jessica was momentarily stunned. She went to the grocery store to buy fever patches after giving me the medication. Regretfully, she encountered Zoe and Anthony on her way back. I had given Jessica my room card for convenience, but Zoe thought she was a mistress when she saw her. She kicked open the door and began arguing with Jessica, looking as though she had caught someone in the act. "I've told you repeatedly that, believe it or not, I'm William's college friend. Why would a college friend be in William's room at this hour of the night? You're just a blatant mistress." Jessica was always prepared to confront her. "Even if he had told you, would you have believed him?" Jessica rolled her eyes, crossed her arms, and turned to face Zoe. Zoe gave her a fierce look and said, "Who are you calling a lover, William? I informed you that Anthony and I are present for work. This outsider just saved my life. And all you do is argue. Have you shown any concern for my illness since you returned?" Anthony, who had been listening, interrupted Zoe when she went silent, saying, "Who said Zoe doesn't care about you? We returned within 30 minutes of your call, didn't we?" Jessica looked at the bags they were holding and said, "I've been to that club. At 2 in the morning it closes. You would have stayed up all night, wouldn't you?" Zoe and Anthony both fell silent. I turned to face Jessica and said, "Thank you so much today. You shouldn't go back by yourself because it's late. You can depart tomorrow after I cover the cost of your hotel room." Jessica shook her head and said, "No need, my brother is coming to get me." "William, take care of yourself and don't let some arrogant people exploit you." She directed a sharp glance at Zoe. Zoe became enraged right away, saying, "Who are you calling shameless?" "Whoever gets angry is who I'm calling shameless. Do you dare?" As they were about to argue again, I yelled, "Enough, Zoe, aren't you embarrassed?" and shut the door, cutting off all sound. Zoe and Anthony went out to work alone every day while I was sick for 3 days, but I stopped caring. After I recovered completely on the 4th day, I decided to assist Zoe and Anthony in completing the survey for their project as soon as possible. I could take care of my problems with Zoe sooner if we got back. I had to reevaluate our marriage. Who would have imagined that I would hear Zoe and Anthony conversing when I arrived at the equipment truck? I flipped on the recorder on a whim, thinking I might catch something significant. Zoe expressed concern. "We've spent over $1 million on this broken equipment. We can't afford to buy a replacement." After a brief pause, Anthony said, "I recall that William's family is wealthy, correct?" "Yes, his parents own a business." "What do you mean?" "Let's hold him accountable." Chapter 4. No one will know. They were all shocked when they emerged and saw me seated on their makeshift camping chair. Zoe's face displayed some discomfort, but Anthony remained composed. Didn't you hear us talking earlier? No. I shook my head. William, when did you get here? I asked, sneering. Just now. Where did you guys go? I didn't see you. Honey, I can't find the equipment. Zoe's eyes brightened, and she gestured to a nearby black van, saying, It's in the back seat, the blue equipment. As I approached, I caught a glimpse of Zoe and Anthony high-fiving. Isn't it right on that seat? I feigned a second glance. Zoe asked impatiently, Isn't it right there? How can you not see it? I nodded quickly. Oh, here it is. But I can't move it by myself, honey. Could you ask Anthony to assist me? She blurted out, Why are you so useless? Anthony can move it on his own. She quickly corrected herself after realizing what she was saying, Okay, I'll get him. I watched as Zoe approached Anthony and said something, and they both gave me a meaningful look. I was aware that they had another plan. Anthony approached me and made fun of me, saying things like, I've heard you've been working out for many years. What was it? Just hormone injections? You can't even lift a small piece of equipment. I didn't argue with him, so we lifted the equipment together. He had a sly gleam in his eyes, obviously plotting something, and I held the equipment steadily, knowing that I could easily carry 2 of these by myself because I usually lift weights that are 2 to 3 times heavier at the gym, but I couldn't show it. After a few steps, Anthony abruptly said, William, hold this for a moment. I need to tie my shoelace. Without waiting for an answer, he released the apparatus. I said quickly, Anthony, hurry up. I can't hold this for long. The more I urged him, the slower he moved, telling me not to worry. I pretended to struggle, calling out several more times. Anthony, seeing that I still hadn't dropped it, couldn't stall tying his shoelace any longer and reluctantly got up. I then said, I need to tie my shoelace too, Anthony. You hold it. With that, I let go and crouched down. Anthony, having crouched for a while, suddenly stood up and felt momentarily dizzy. Thinking he could handle it, he didn't pay much attention. In that moment of inattention, the equipment slipped from his hands and crashed straight to the ground. Chapter 5. The casing immediately shattered, and the main body of the device was full of cracks, rendering it unusable. Everyone was shocked by this sudden turn of events. Zoe, from a distance, thought she had succeeded and hurried over, saying, William, this is $1 million device. I pointed at Anthony innocently and said, It wasn't me. You should pay for it since you broke it. Anthony didn't remain calm. No, it was you who let go first. Anthony shot back, obviously stunned. I told you I needed to tie my shoelace, and you nodded. Zoe couldn't help but defend Anthony because she hadn't anticipated how things would turn out. Couldn't you wait until Anthony had a better grip before letting go? Zoe asked, but Anthony just did the same thing. He abruptly let go without warning and claimed that he needed to tie his shoelace. When Anthony finally realized, he looked at me with red eyes and said, William, you did it on purpose. If I hadn't held it steady, the one in trouble might have been me. Why would I frame you? Are you implying that the machine was already malfunctioning, and my intention was to shift the blame on you? I asked in shock. That would be unbelievably cruel of me. Zoe and Anthony's faces alternated between green and white. They wanted to say something, but they couldn't think of anything to say. I don't care. Even if the machine malfunctions, you still carry some responsibility. If there's compensation, we should share it. I quickly directed my attention to the nanny's vehicle behind. No way, the dash cam captured everything clearly. I let go with your consent. Although the audio isn't clear, your nodding is visible. Shall we check the footage? After I said this, Anthony's face turned ashen. He squatted down and muttered to himself, $1 million, that is beyond my means. Even if I sold myself, I couldn't afford it. Zoe's heart ached when she saw this. William, even if we take a step back, don't you bear any responsibility? What responsibility? Even if I take 10,000 steps back, I have no responsibility. Zoe glared at me and rushed to console the squatting Anthony, realizing that she couldn't argue with me. Okay, you two consider how to make up for it. I've got something to do and need to go. Leaving them with this, I turned and drove straight to the city bank. After verifying my identity at the bank, I was ushered into the VIP room. I wasn't there to withdraw money for Anthony. On the contrary, I was there to prevent that from happening. Mr. Sue, what business would you like to conduct today? I want to cancel a supplementary card under my name. After getting married, I had given Zoe a supplementary card. I transferred all my company dividends to that card and told her to spend as she pleased. Knowing Zoe, she would surely use my card to pay Anthony's compensation. I had to cut off this possibility in advance. Certainly. Since you have a high membership level, we can process this right away. Before Zoe and Anthony knew what had happened, I canceled the supplemental card and left for Beijing. My phone exploded with calls from Zoe after the 5-hour flight landed as planned. Chapter 6. I called back slowly, and a hysterical voice said, "William, did you cancel my card?" "Yes, there is a problem," I said. "But why did you cancel the card? Didn't you say it was for me to use? Besides, that's our marital property. Do you even have the right to cancel it?" I laughed as I listened to her nervous and uneasy voice. "Unlock the supplementary card immediately. I need to use it now." Zoe's voice carried a tone of command. "Do I need to report this to you?" I said softly, obviously trying to enrage her. "Sorry, that's not going to happen. Where are you now, William? I just went to your room and couldn't find you." Zoe cursed me savagely on the other end, but I pretended not to hear it, even picking my ear boredly. "Oh, I forgot to tell you. I went back to Beijing." "Why did you go back? You were unhappy with me being there, right?" I thought about it, and since Anthony is in such a mess, I decided not to add to his troubles. "Oh, and by the way, come back soon. It's time for a divorce." I casually hung up the phone after dropping this bombshell. I went to the company first after I got back. I gave the security staff and the receptionist instructions to make sure Zoe couldn't enter if she caused any problems. They ought to make a direct police call. After that, I returned to our house in the downtown area and had the locks changed. I made travel plans to Europe for a month and packed my bags. I took my parents with me when I went to their house. I started my vacation with joy. I had previously made arrangements for a qualified agent to manage my business matters. In case they need to get in touch with me, I have a new phone number. I took out my previous phone number and put it in my wallet. Not visible, not thought. I hadn't felt so at ease since I married Zoe. She constantly made fun of me for not being able to provide her with a happy life and pushed me to work hard. I worked frantically out of fear that such a thing might occur. Being the boss, I was the first to arrive at work and the last to leave. My nerves had been tense like a string for the previous 3 years, never letting go. I could feel my body and mind relaxing as I breathed in the damp air of an unidentified European town. In retrospect, I was amazed at how I had made it through those times. I took the plane home after a pleasant month-long vacation with my parents. My parents appeared to sense that there were issues in my marriage to Zoe, which is why we went on vacation, but no one dared to inquire for fear of upsetting me. Zoe was the only person I would ever marry in this lifetime because I loved her so much. I kept my parents in the dark. It wasn't healthy for them to get upset because they were elderly. I made the decision to deal with my issues independently. I put the phone card that had lain unused for a month back in after I got home. As anticipated, a deluge of calls and messages poured in as soon as I inserted it. Actually, Zoe had been harassing me on social media, but I blocked her everywhere, which helped me relax. There were hundreds of messages, but I didn't even bother to read them. "When are we getting a divorce?" I called Zoe, and her hysterical voice answered, "William, where have you been this month? Do you know, Anthony took out a high-interest loan to pay the compensation and is now being pursued by creditors? How can you be so heartless?" Chapter 7. Such good news. Unfortunately, I was so out of touch while abroad that I didn't know about it in time. To get the whole story of the previous month, I contacted a mutual friend. Zoe, who has a good temper, even tried to calm Anthony down after I canceled Zoe's supplementary card and left for overseas by yelling at her, "Didn't you say you could pay for me? What now? Can I not pay it back?" Zoe even tried to calm him down by saying, "It's okay, I'll go to Beijing and ask William for money face to face." But when she arrived at my house, she discovered that I had changed the locks in addition to leaving the country. Helpless, Zoe came to my workplace, but the receptionist would never let her in, no matter how much of a commotion she made. She then intended to ask my parents for forgiveness, only to find out that I had also taken them away. She was totally broken by this. She had about 300,000 yuan in a small stash and borrowed more from other people. However, my friends reprimanded her in addition to refusing to lend her money. She attempted to borrow from her coworkers and was only able to scrape together roughly 100,000 yuan, leaving her 600,000 short. Anthony gritted his teeth and borrowed 600,000 yuan from local loan sharks, promising to pay back 700,000 yuan within a month, in response to pressure from the lab that owned the damaged equipment to make the payment. Who knows where he got the confidence to believe he could pay it back? Perhaps he believed he could still get money from me with Zoe. After a month, debt collectors created a commotion at Anthony's workplace, which led to his termination. He sought refuge elsewhere, but the collectors discovered him and beat him, sending him to the hospital. Anthony was constantly contacted by the loan sharks. Except for Zoe, who remained by his side in the hospital, everyone had now abandoned him. I couldn't stop laughing when my friend told me this amazing story. He said, "The most important thing now is to divorce Zoe, but I doubt it will be easy." I reassured him, "Don't worry. I have proof." It's okay if Zoe consents to the divorce amicably. However, it won't be a straightforward divorce if she causes conflict and takes it to court. Indeed, Zoe hurried to find me as soon as she learned I had returned to the country. When she saw me, she walked quickly in my direction, looking quite exhausted from caring for someone. "William, where have you been this past month? Do you know how difficult it's been for us here?" "I know," I said without emotion. "So what does that have to do with me? Are you upset that I want to use our shared marital property? I'm still your wife. Didn't you get my divorce agreement? You go with nothing." I watched her get furious. I sneered and played a recording from my phone, explaining why I didn't cheat. "It's not just about cheating. I have grounds to suspect that you married me for a secret." Zoe had been yelling at me, but she abruptly stopped when she heard the voices on the phone. "What do we do?" "This equipment is broken," Zoe said, "and this equipment costs more than $1 million. Zoe muttered incredulously, "You knew. You knew everything." Chapter 8. So, what if I knew? Zoe's eyes flashed with malice as she glared at me. "So you deliberately called Anthony over to help you move the equipment just to frame him." I scowled at her wording that was wrong. "If we break it, neither of us can afford to pay." Anthony hurt himself while attempting to frame me. "And let me tell you, if you don't agree to the divorce, I'll turn this recording over to the police." "Zoe, I'm the victim here. I only escaped your trap. Everything you and Anthony are going through right now is what you deserve. It's possible that you and Anthony will meet in prison." Zoe's once proud head finally lowered in fear upon hearing my final words. "William, you're something else. Doesn't 3 years of marriage make you feel any pity?" "For people like you, it's not worth it," I responded sternly. Watching Zoe sign the divorce agreement, I immediately sent it to my lawyer and scheduled the formalities for a month later. There's a 1-month cooling-off period for divorces now, but I won't regret it. That incident made me see Zoe's true nature and realize that my 3 years of feelings were not worth it. That's why I could walk away so firmly. Otherwise, Zoe's manipulations would continue to trap me, making it impossible for me to escape. A few days later was a class reunion, which I attended. My classmates knew about my divorce and didn't try to persuade me otherwise. Only Jessica patted my shoulder. That day at the hotel, I wanted to advise you to file for divorce. However, considering how you were aggressively pursuing Zoe while in college, I was worried you would regret it once you recovered, so I remained silent. I was terrible at judging people back in college. Jessica, I just got out of a marriage, I said awkwardly. Who's asking you to agree now? There's plenty of time in the future, she said, raising her hand to stop me without showing any signs of embarrassment. I returned her smile, saying, yes, there is plenty of time in the future. The day Zoe and I were supposed to finalize the divorce came around a month later. Zoe appeared to have taken great care in her attire. I wasn't sure if it was to make me regret the divorce or to celebrate it, but I couldn't give a damn about how gorgeous she was. Let's go finish the formalities. William, you know that, once we enter, there's no way out. I gave a non-committal nod. When Zoe saw my attitude, she bit her lip and moved closer, saying, but I regret it. Don't you want to give our marriage another chance? Zoe, we both know the truth. I pushed her away immediately. What I didn't see was her signaling to someone behind a nearby car. Zoe and I entered the Civil Affairs Bureau together. Reflecting on the last time I came here, I was so excited and full of anticipation for married life. But now, looking back, that kind of life only existed in my memory because I married Zoe, so it could never happen. The procedures transpired more swiftly than anticipated, and I exhaled with a sense of relief as I grasped the divorce certificate. The entire process was complete. Perhaps seeing my relaxed face, Zoe's appearance turned extremely ugly. What, divorcing me makes you so happy? I laughed twice. I apologize that you noticed. I will no longer pretend now that you have noticed. I was about to open the door of my car after leaving the Civil Affairs Bureau when Zoe walked up to me and said, even though we're divorced, it was a peaceful divorce. Why not give me a ride? I didn't even look at her. Sorry, it's inconvenient. Later, I have to pick someone up. Jessica had made plans to join me for dinner while she was in Beijing on a business trip. I was occupied with responding to her. Zoe looked at my phone and spoke in an irate tone. I sneered and responded, better than you finding someone before the divorce. Chatting with a woman, huh? I can't believe you found someone else right after our divorce. They were trying to guilt-trip me again. I was talking to Jessica and didn't realize Zoe was gone when Anthony's voice abruptly interrupted me from behind. William, I wouldn't be in this predicament if it weren't for you. You are solely to blame. Together, let's go to hell. I had no time to respond. Anthony was running toward me with a shiny knife when I looked up. The knife still pierced my chest even though I avoided the deadly spot. My body seemed to lose all of its strength, leaving me feeling empty. I saw blood splatter out. This road was not very crowded at the moment. When Anthony realized what he had done, he fled. When the employees of the Civil Affairs Bureau emerged, they discovered me, lying in a pool of blood. After screaming, they hurriedly dialed an ambulance. I was barely conscious when I was being lifted into the ambulance, so I grabbed a doctor's hand and yelled, "The culprit is Anthony, and Zoe is an accomplice." I'm not sure if the doctor heard me because I passed out, and when I woke up, I was already in the hospital. My chest hurt so much that even the slightest movement felt like it was tearing. I had no choice but to move my eyes, and I noticed Jessica sleeping next to me, holding my hand. I gently moved my fingers and she woke up right away, pleased. "You're awake. I'll call the doctor." The doctor that Jessica brought over briefly described my condition. Fortunately, I managed to avoid Anthony's stab wound, which prevented it from being fatal, but I was weak and had lost a lot of blood, and since the wound had just been treated, I was unable to move and had to remain in bed for a while. However, I was more interested in learning if Anthony and Zoe had been apprehended than in this. Chapter 10. The Civil Affairs Bureau employee followed me to the hospital and called the police after the ambulance arrived. The doctor informed the police of my pre-ambulance statement because I was unconscious, and Zoe and Anthony were promptly identified using the scene's surveillance footage. Anthony was not found that day, but Zoe was taken into custody. In her phone, the police discovered proof of Zoe's complicity in a plot to harm me. The police were now searching the entire city for Anthony. I indicated that I understood by nodding. Anthony actually dared to stab me in public, which I never thought would happen. He appeared to be willing to take any chance. After giving it some thought, I was glad I had avoided the crucial area. Otherwise, it would have been a devastating defeat if Anthony had been successful. To beg me, Zoe's parents brought fruit to the hospital. Despite the fact that I had been their son-in-law for 3 years, I could still recall their attempts to take advantage of me financially. As she sat next to my bed, Zoe's mother looked at Jessica as she peeled an apple. Zoe's mother looked unhappy as I nodded at her and said, "You found a girlfriend right after divorcing Zoe. Were you seeing her before the divorce?" "Stop. I don't need to explain my fidelity to you, but Zoe conspiring to murder me isn't exactly irrelevant." "Auntie, you can speak freely. This is my girlfriend." Zoe's mother expressed embarrassment. "A stab wound nearly claimed my life. Can't you let this go over?" "How would you feel as a parent if someone did this to Zoe?" Zoe's mother obstinately retorted. "But you didn't die, did you?" I felt nothing but disgust looking at her face, which looked like Zoe's. "Rest assured, if I had died, your daughter wouldn't be alive either. The death penalty is applied to attempted murder. Maybe Zoe was misled by that, Anthony. You know she's not like that." Hearing the same old excuse, I grew impatient. Jessica seemed to have had enough standing up to drive them out. "The patient needs rest. I'll call security, so please leave if you have nothing else." Jessica sat back down and asked me, "Were you serious just now?" I pretended not to understand. "You little girl, you—" Before they could say anything more, Jessica pushed them all out, leaving the room silent. "About what?" "About me being your girlfriend." I wrapped the blanket around myself. I don't say things lightly. Whatever I say reflects what I'm truly thinking. A week later, Anthony was apprehended on a boat attempting to smuggle himself out of the country. He had intended to flee overseas, but was apprehended during a crackdown on smuggling. Both Anthony and Zoe blamed each other in court, each claiming that the other was the mastermind and that they were the victim. Ultimately, the evidence proved that Anthony was the one who came up with the idea to harm me, and the court sentenced Anthony to life in prison for attempted murder, while Zoe was sentenced to 10 years as an accomplice. Zoe's parents spent all of their money and tried everything they could to get her sentence reduced, but to no avail. They all received the punishment they deserved.